The gymnasium fell silent except for the steady clank of metal plates being loaded onto the barbell. Sarah Martinez wiped her calloused palms against her worn lifting gloves, her brown eyes fixed on the 405-pound deadlift that had just been set before her. Around her, a circle of Navy SEALs crossed their arms and exchanged skeptical glances. At 5'4" and 135 pounds, she looked like a gentle breeze could knock her over. What they didn't know was that this unassuming woman from a small Texas town carried within her the kind of raw determination that could move mountains. "You sure about this, Martinez?" Petty Officer Jackson called out, his voice carrying that particular blend of concern and doubt that she'd heard countless times before. "That's more weight than some of our guys can handle." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to the dusty garage where her journey began, where an 8-year-old girl first wrapped her tiny hands around a rusty barbell her grandfather had salvaged from a closed gym. She remembered the promise she'd made to herself that day, the one that would carry her through years of being underestimated, overlooked, and outright dismissed. Today wasn't just about lifting weight. Today was about proving that strength isn't measured in inches or pounds, but in the unbreakable will of someone who refuses to accept limitations. Today, Sarah Martinez would show the world that sometimes the most extraordinary power comes wrapped in the most ordinary packages. The barbell waited, cold and unforgiving, ready to either crown a champion or crush a dream. Sarah Martinez grew up in the kind of small Texas town where everyone knew everyone, and dreams were expected to stay as small as the population sign at the city limits. Millbrook had exactly 2,847 residents, 1 high school, 3 churches, and a general consensus that girls like Sarah should focus on more practical pursuits than the strange obsession she developed with lifting heavy things. The obsession began in her grandfather's garage when she was 8 years old. Eduardo Martinez had been a construction worker for 43 years before a back injury forced him into early retirement. His garage became his sanctuary, filled with tools, half-finished projects, and in one corner, an old Olympic barbell set he'd bought from a gym that was closing down. The weights were mismatched, some rusted, others chipped from years of use, but to young Sarah they represented something magical. "Abuelo, why do you have those big metal circles?" she asked one sweltering summer afternoon, pointing at the weight plates stacked against the wall like iron pancakes. Eduardo looked up from the lawnmower engine he was rebuilding, wiping grease from his weathered hands. "Those are weights, mija. They make you strong." He flexed his still impressive bicep and grinned. "Used to lift them every day when I was younger." Sarah walked over to the smallest plate, a 10-pounder that looked enormous in her small hands. She tried to lift it over her head like she'd seen strongmen do on television, but it was heavier than expected. The weight crashed to the concrete floor with a resounding clang that echoed through the garage. "Careful, Sarah!" Eduardo rushed over, but instead of scolding her, he saw something in her eyes that gave him pause. Determination. Real, raw determination that reminded him of himself at that age. "You want to learn how to do this properly?" That question changed everything. Every day after school, Sarah would run the 6 blocks from Millbrook Elementary to her grandfather's house, burst through the front door with a quick "Hola, abuela" to her grandmother, and head straight to the garage, where Eduardo waited with increasingly creative ways to teach an 8-year-old the fundamentals of strength training. They started with body weight exercises, push-ups against the wall, then on her knees, then full push-ups, squats using just her body weight, planks that left her shaking after 30 seconds. Eduardo was patient but demanding, never letting her quit even when tears of frustration rolled down her cheeks. "Strength isn't just about muscles, Sarah," he would tell her during their water breaks. "It's about your mind. When your body wants to quit, your mind has to be stronger. That's the real secret." By age 10, Sarah could deadlift the empty 45-pound barbell with perfect form. Eduardo had spent months teaching her the movement, starting with a broomstick to ingrain the hip hinge pattern that would become second nature. He emphasized technique over weight, form over ego, consistency over intensity. "In lifting como en la vida, the foundation must be solid," he would say, adjusting her stance or correcting her grip. "Build it right, and it will never break." The other kids at school thought Sarah was weird. While they played video games or gossiped about pop stars, She talked about personal records and proper nutrition. Her best friend Jessica tried to understand, but eventually drifted away to more conventional interests. Teachers smiled politely when Sarah wrote essays about her training goals, but gently suggested she might want to consider more traditional activities for young ladies. Sarah's parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, watched their daughter's unusual hobby with a mixture of pride and concern. Carlos worked long hours at the local auto repair shop, while Maria cleaned houses for the wealthier families on the north side of town. They wanted Sarah to focus on academics, to earn a scholarship that would take her far from Millbrook's limited opportunities. "She's obsessed with those weights," Maria confided to her sister during one of their weekly phone calls. "Es saludable, but I worry she's missing out on normal things. Other girls her age are joining the cheerleading squad or taking dance classes." But Eduardo saw something different. He saw a girl who showed up every single day, even when she was tired, even when friends teased her, even when the Texas heat made the garage feel like an oven. He saw someone who listened to instruction, applied correction, and pushed through discomfort with a mental toughness that couldn't be taught. When Sarah turned 12, Eduardo decided she was ready for a real challenge. The local high school was hosting a youth powerlifting meet, and he thought she should compete. The idea terrified and thrilled Sarah in equal measure. "But abuelo, what if I'm not strong enough? What if everyone laughs at me?" Eduardo knelt down to her eye level, his calloused hands on her shoulders. "Mija, strength isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being stronger than you were yesterday. You've been getting stronger every day for 4 years. That's what matters." The meet was Sarah's first real glimpse into a world beyond Millbrook's borders. Teenagers from across the region gathered in the high school gym, and the energy was electric. The sound of plates clanging, coaches shouting encouragement, and competitors psyching themselves up created an atmosphere unlike anything Sarah had experienced. She was the youngest competitor by 3 years and one of only 2 girls. The other girl, Amanda Peterson from Dallas, looked like she belonged in a fitness magazine. She was tall, muscular, and moved with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to be in that space. Sarah's first event was the squat. She had worked up to 135 pounds in training, a respectable number for a 12-year-old girl who weighed barely 90 pounds herself. As she approached the bar for her opening attempt at 115 pounds, she could hear whispers from the crowd. "Is that little girl really going to try to squat that? Where are her parents? Someone should stop this before she gets hurt." The doubt in their voices only strengthened Sarah's resolve. She ducked under the bar, positioned it on her shoulders, exactly as Eduardo had taught her, and stood up. The weight felt familiar, comfortable even. She took 3 steps back, set her feet, took a deep breath, and descended into the squat. The ascent felt smooth and controlled. As she stood up with the weight, the gymnasium erupted in surprised applause. Sarah had not only completed the lift, but made it look easy. She caught Eduardo's eye in the crowd and saw tears streaming down his weathered face. Her second attempt at 125 pounds was equally successful. For her third attempt, Eduardo called for 140 pounds, a personal record that would put her in contention for first place in her age group. Sarah had never attempted that much weight before, but something in her grandfather's eyes told her she was ready. The bar felt heavier this time, no doubt about it. As she descended into the squat, Sarah felt her legs shake slightly under the load. At the bottom of the movement, for just a moment, she wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew. But then she heard Eduardo's voice cutting through the crowd noise. "Vamos, Sarah. You are stronger than you know." Something ignited inside her. Sarah drove up from the bottom of the squat with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including herself. The weight moved steadily upward until she stood tall and proud, 140 pounds on her shoulders, a 12-year-old girl who had just announced to the world that she was not to be underestimated. The crowd went wild. Even the older male competitors, who had initially viewed her as a novelty, were now watching with genuine respect. Amanda Peterson, who had missed her final squat attempt, came over to congratulate Sarah with obvious admiration. "That was incredible," Amanda said, shaking Sarah's hand. "I've been lifting for 3 years and I can barely squat that much. How long have you been training?" 4 years, Sarah replied, still buzzing from the adrenaline of her successful lift. 4 years. How is that possible? You're so young. Sarah smiled, thinking of all those afternoons in Eduardo's garage, all the times she wanted to quit but didn't, all the lessons about mental toughness and proper form. My grandfather taught me that strength is built one day at a time. The bench press and deadlift events went equally well. Sarah's consistent training and Eduardo's emphasis on technique paid dividends, as she executed lift after lift with textbook form. By the end of the day, she had not only won her age group, but had also posted some of the best pound-for-pound numbers in the entire competition. The drive home to Millbrook was quiet. Eduardo's old pickup truck hummed along the highway as Sarah stared out the window, her first-place trophy in her lap. The reality of what had happened was still sinking in. "Abuelo," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Do you think I could be really good at this? Like, compete at high levels?" Eduardo glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes twinkling with pride and possibility. "Sarah, today you showed me something I suspected but wasn't sure about. You don't just have physical strength. You have the heart of a champion. With the right training and the right opportunities, there's no telling how far you could go." That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at her trophy and thinking about Amanda Peterson's question. How was it possible that she had been training for 4 years when she was only 12? The answer was simple but profound. She had started when most people thought she was too young, continued when others thought she was too small, and persevered when everyone expected her to quit. The foundation Eduardo had helped her build was indeed solid. What Sarah didn't know yet was that this foundation would need to support not just her physical ambitions, but also the weight of expectations, skepticism, and challenges that lay ahead. The little girl from Millbrook, Texas, had taken her first step into a larger world, and there would be no going back. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah could already feel tomorrow calling. Another day in the garage with Eduardo. Another opportunity to get stronger. Another chance to prove that greatness comes in all sizes, and sometimes the most powerful force in the world is a young girl with an unshakable belief in herself. High school changed everything for Sarah Martinez, though not in the way she expected. Millbrook High had a weight room, but it was essentially reserved for the football team. The coach, a thick-necked former college linebacker named Robert Stevens, had very definite ideas about who belonged in his domain and who didn't. "Absolutely not," Coach Stevens said when Sarah approached him about using the weight room during her free period. "The equipment is for varsity athletics only. Besides, you're so small you'd probably hurt yourself." Sarah had grown since that first powerlifting meet, but at 14 she still looked like a strong breeze might carry her away. What wasn't visible was the additional 50 pounds she could now deadlift, or the hours of technique refinement that had transformed her from an eager beginner into a legitimately skilled young lifter. "I've been training for 6 years, Coach Stevens," Sarah explained, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "I compete in powerlifting meets. I know how to use the equipment safely." Stevens barely looked up from his clipboard. "Listen, sweetheart. I'm sure you mean well, but this isn't a place for little girls to play around. Why don't you try out for the cheerleading squad instead? I hear they're always looking for flyers." The dismissal stung, but Sarah had learned from Eduardo that obstacles were just opportunities in disguise. If she couldn't train at school, she would find another way. That afternoon, she walked into Martinez Auto Repair, where her father was elbow-deep in the engine of a 1995 Ford pickup. "Papa, I need to ask you something important." Carlos Martinez wiped his hands on a greasy rag and gave his daughter his full attention. Sarah had inherited his stubborn streak, and when she used that tone, he knew she was serious about something. "The school won't let me use their weight room," Sarah explained. "Coach Stevens says it's only for varsity sports, but I think it's because I'm a girl. I need somewhere better to train than Abuelo's garage." Carlos considered this. Business had been good lately, and he'd been thinking about expanding the shop anyway. The building next door had been vacant for months, and the rent was reasonable. "What exactly are you proposing, mija? Let me help you turn that empty space into a real gym. Not just for me, but for other people in town who want to get strong. We could make it a business." The idea was bold, maybe even crazy. Millbrook had never had a commercial gym, and conventional wisdom said there wasn't enough demand to support one. But Carlos had watched his daughter's dedication for 6 years, had seen her win meet after meet, and had noticed how other parents were starting to ask questions about her training methods. "Your mother and I would need to discuss this," he said carefully. "It would be a big investment, and we'd need to be sure it makes sense financially." That evening, the Martinez family held one of their marathon kitchen table discussions. Maria was skeptical about the business prospects but proud of Sarah's initiative. Eduardo, whose arthritis had been getting worse, was enthusiastic about the possibility of having a proper training facility. Carlos ran numbers on a yellow legal pad, calculating startup costs and potential revenue streams. "If we do this," Maria finally said, "it has to be done right. No cutting corners, no half measures. And Sarah, you would need to help run it. This can't just be an expensive hobby." 3 months later, Millbrook Strength opened its doors in a renovated auto parts store on Main Street. Sarah had spent her entire summer vacation painting walls, assembling equipment, and learning about business licenses and liability insurance. The grand opening was scheduled for the same weekend as the Regional High School Powerlifting Championships, which Sarah was competing in as an individual since her school didn't have a team. The meet was being held at Roosevelt High in Austin, a massive school with a powerlifting program that had produced several state champions. Sarah walked into their pristine facility and immediately felt out of place. The Roosevelt athletes had matching warm-up suits, professional coaching staff, and equipment that looked like it had never been used. "You must be the girl from Millbrook," said Katie Rodriguez, Roosevelt's star lifter, as she stretched nearby. Katie was a senior, built like a compact bulldozer, and holder of the state record in the 148-pound class. "I heard you train in your grandfather's garage."
"Not anymore,"
Sarah replied, focusing on her own warm-up routine.
"We just opened a real gym."
Katie laughed, but not unkindly. "That's cool. Still, this is a big step up from local meets. You sure you're ready for this level of competition?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question. The weights she would attempt today were heavier than anything she had ever tried. Her opening squat would be 185 pounds, 20 pounds more than her current personal record. But Eduardo had convinced her that she was ready for the challenge. "Sometimes you have to reach for something before you know you can grasp it," he had told her during their final training session. "Today, you reach." The squat event began with the lighter weight classes. Sarah watched the other competitors with a mixture of anxiety and analytical interest. These lifters were technically proficient and mentally tough, but she noticed that many of them seemed to rely on pure aggression rather than the methodical approach Eduardo had taught her. When her name was called for her opening attempt, Sarah felt surprisingly calm. She had visualized this lift hundreds of times, broken it down into its component parts, and prepared for every possible scenario. As she approached the bar, she blocked out the noise of the crowd and focused on Eduardo's voice. "Remember, mija, the weight doesn't know how small you are. It only knows if you're strong enough to move it." The squat felt solid and controlled. As Sarah stood up with 185 pounds on her shoulders, she heard gasps from the Roosevelt crowd. She had not only completed a personal record lift, but had done it with textbook form and apparent ease. Her second attempt at 195 pounds was equally successful. For her third attempt, Eduardo called for 205 pounds, a number that would put Sarah within striking distance of Katie Rodriguez's long-standing school record. "Are you sure about this?" the head judge asked Eduardo quietly. "That's a lot of weight for someone her size." Eduardo's response was firm but respectful. "She's ready. We wouldn't attempt it if she wasn't." As Sarah prepared for her final squat attempt, she could feel the attention of the entire gym focused on her. Conversations had stopped. Warm-up activities had paused, and even the other coaches were watching to see if the small girl from the small town could handle the big weight. The bar felt different this time. Not necessarily heavier, but more significant. Sarah knew that this lift would either establish her as a legitimate contender at the state level, or send her home with the knowledge that she had reached her ceiling. She ducked under the bar, set her shoulders, and stood up. The walkout felt controlled. The descent was smooth. At the bottom of the squat, Sarah paused for just a moment, not because she was struggling, but because she wanted to remember this feeling. This was the moment where potential became reality, where years of preparation crystallized into a single explosive movement. The ascent was a thing of beauty. Sarah drove up from the bottom position with perfect technique and unwavering determination. As she completed the lift, The gymnasium erupted in spontaneous applause. Even Katie Rodriguez was clapping, her expression a mixture of surprise and genuine respect. The bench press event went equally well. Sarah's patient approach to building upper body strength, combined with Eduardo's emphasis on proper arch and leg drive, allowed her to post numbers that surprised even her most optimistic predictions. By the time the deadlift event began, she was in second place overall, and within reach of winning her weight class. Deadlifting had always been Sarah's strongest event. There was something about the pure primal nature of picking up heavy weight that resonated with her on a fundamental level. Her opening attempt at 235 pounds felt like an empty barbell. Her second attempt at 250 pounds moved just as easily. For her final attempt, Eduardo called for 265 pounds, a lift that would not only give Sarah the victory in her weight class, but would also break the existing meet record by 5 pounds. The number seemed almost surreal. When Sarah had started lifting 7 years earlier, she couldn't deadlift the empty barbell. Now she was attempting to pull nearly twice her body weight. As she approached the bar for her final lift, Sarah thought about all the people who had doubted her along the way. Coach Stevens, who had refused to let her use the school weight room. The kids at school who had called her weird for choosing barbells over boys. The meet directors who had questioned whether someone her size should be competing at this level. But she also thought about the people who had believed in her. Eduardo, who had spent countless hours teaching her the fundamentals. Her parents, who had invested their savings in her dream. The members of Millbrook Strength, who had embraced the gym as a community gathering place and treated Sarah like the athlete she had worked so hard to become. The deadlift setup felt perfect. Sarah's hands were positioned correctly, her back was neutral, and her feet were planted firmly on the platform. She took a deep breath, engaged her lats, and began to pull. The weight came off the floor smoothly, but as it passed her knees, Sarah felt it slow down. This was the sticking point, the moment where most deadlifts succeeded or failed. For a brief instant she wondered if she had finally met her match. Then she heard Eduardo's voice cutting through the crowd noise, speaking in Spanish as he always did when emotions overcame him. "Tú puedes, Sara. Eres más fuerte de lo que crees." Something deep inside Sarah responded to those words. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who had first picked up that rusty weight plate in Eduardo's garage. She thought about the promise she had made to herself to never accept limitations. She thought about all the little girls who might be watching, wondering if they too could be strong. With a roar that surprised everyone, including herself, Sarah locked out the deadlift. 265 pounds rose from the floor to her hips in a display of raw determination that left the entire gymnasium stunned into silence before erupting in the loudest cheers of the day. As Sarah set the weight down and raised her arms in victory, she caught sight of Katie Rodriguez approaching. The Roosevelt star, who had been broken her own school records that day, had tears in her eyes. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," Katie said, embracing Sarah in a bear hug. "You just showed everyone in here what's possible when you refuse to accept limits. You're going to do amazing things." The drive back to Millbrook was different from that first meet 6 years earlier. Sarah was no longer the promising young beginner, but an established competitor who had proven she belonged on any platform. The 3 first-place trophies in the back seat were nice, but the real victory was the knowledge that she had pushed through a barrier that had existed only in her mind. "Abuelo," she said as they crossed the city limits of their small town, "do you think other people noticed what happened today? I mean, beyond just the lifting?" Eduardo smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. "Yes, Mija. Today, you showed everyone that strength isn't about where you come from or how big you are. You showed them that the only limits that matter are the ones we accept for ourselves." That night, Sarah stood in the middle of Millbrook Strength, surrounded by the equipment she and her family had worked so hard to acquire. The gym was modest compared to the facilities she had competed in, but it was theirs. More importantly, it was a place where anyone could come to discover their own strength, regardless of their size, gender, or background. As she locked up and headed home, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first day in Eduardo's garage. She was stronger, more confident, and more aware of the impact her journey was having on others. But she also knew that bigger challenges lay ahead. The state championships were approaching, and beyond that, college recruitment and the possibility of competing at levels she had only dreamed about. The foundation Eduardo had helped her build was proving to be even more solid than either of them had imagined. Now it was time to see just how high she could build upon it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered to Millbrook Strength, in an official military envelope that made Sarah's hands shake as she opened it. The Navy had been recruiting her since her record-breaking performance at the state powerlifting championships, but this invitation was different from the standard recruitment materials she'd been receiving. "Candidate Martinez," the letter began, "you are hereby invited to participate in a special training evaluation at Naval Special Warfare Group 2 in Little Creek, Virginia. This assessment will determine your suitability for advanced physical training programs and potential inclusion in experimental fitness protocols currently under development." Sarah read the letter 3 times before the full meaning sank in. They wanted her to train with Navy SEALs. Not just visit, not just observe, but actually participate in their physical training regimen. At 18 years old, having just graduated from Millbrook High as valedictorian, she was being offered an opportunity that most people could only imagine. Eduardo found her sitting on a bench in the gym, staring at the letter with a mixture of excitement and terror. At 71, her grandfather moved more slowly than he used to, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He could read Sarah's emotional state like a well-worn book. "Good news or bad news, mija?" he asked, settling beside her with a slight grunt. "I think it's good news," Sarah replied, handing him the letter. "But I'm scared, abuelo. What if I'm not ready? What if I embarrass myself?" Eduardo read the invitation carefully, his weathered face breaking into a proud smile. "Sarah, do you remember what I told you when you were 8 years old and afraid to try deadlifting the empty barbell?"
You said strength isn't about being the strongest person in the room.
"It's about being stronger than you were yesterday." "And how much stronger are you today than you were 10 years ago?" Sarah laughed despite her nervousness. The comparison was almost absurd. 10 years ago, she could barely lift the empty barbell. Now she was deadlifting over 400 pounds and had set multiple state records in her weight class. But this felt different. This was the military elite, men who had been selected for their extraordinary physical and mental capabilities. The training camp was scheduled for late May, giving Sarah 6 weeks to prepare. Eduardo immediately began modifying her training program, incorporating more functional movements and endurance work alongside her traditional powerlifting routine. They added tire flips, rope climbs, and long-distance runs to her regimen, transforming Millbrook Strength into a laboratory for exploring the limits of human performance. Word of Sarah's invitation spread quickly through their small town. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Girl to Train with Navy SEALs." The response was overwhelmingly positive, with neighbors stopping by the gym to wish her luck and share their own military stories. Even Coach Stevens from the high school, who had initially dismissed her as too small and weak, came by to offer his congratulations and apologies. "I was wrong about you, Sarah," he admitted, his usual bluster replaced by genuine humility. "I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment. What you've accomplished is remarkable, and I hope you know that you've inspired a lot of people in this community." As the departure date approached, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that had preceded every major competition in her powerlifting career. But this was bigger than any meet she had ever entered. This was about proving that excellence comes in all packages, that determination can overcome any physical limitation, and that the small-town girl with the big dreams could hold her own in any arena. The flight to Norfolk, Virginia was Sarah's first time on an airplane. As she pressed her face to the window during takeoff, watching the familiar landscape of Texas shrink away below her, she felt like she was crossing a threshold into a completely new chapter of her life. In her carry-on bag, she had packed her lucky lifting gloves, a photo of Eduardo from her first powerlifting meet, and a small notebook where she had written down every lesson he had taught her over the years. Naval Special Warfare Group 2 was intimidating in a way that no powerlifting venue had ever been. The base was sprawling and efficient, filled with personnel who moved with the kind of purposeful intensity that marked truly elite organizations. Sarah's escort, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, was a former SEAL who had transitioned to training and evaluation roles. "You're smaller than I expected," he said matter-of-factly as they walked across the base. "But the numbers you've posted are impressive. We're curious to see how raw strength translates to functional performance under stress. The other participants in the evaluation were exactly what Sarah had imagined Navy SEALs would look like. Tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing they were among the best-trained warriors in the world. When she walked into the orientation meeting, conversations stopped and heads turned. She could practically hear the questions running through their minds. What is she doing here? Is this some kind of publicity stunt? How is someone her size going to keep up? Petty Officer First Class Marcus Jackson seemed to be the group's informal leader. At 6'2" and 220 pounds of lean muscle, he looked like he had been carved from granite. His initial skepticism was evident in his expression, but his tone remained professional as he introduced himself. Martinez, right? I've heard about your powerlifting records. Impressive stuff. But this is going to be different from competition lifting. We're talking about functional strength under extreme conditions. You sure you're ready for this? Sarah had been preparing for this moment, this question, since she first read the invitation letter. Petty Officer Jackson, I've been underestimated my entire life because of my size. Every time, I've responded by exceeding expectations. I'm not here to prove I'm the strongest person in the room. I'm here to prove that strength comes in many forms, and that heart and determination matter as much as physical size. Jackson's expression softened slightly. Fair enough. Let's see what you've got. The first day of evaluation focused on basic strength assessments. Pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and a timed run. These were the fundamentals that every SEAL candidate had to master, and Sarah approached them with the same methodical preparation that had served her well in powerlifting competitions. The pull-up station was her first real test. The minimum requirement was 12 repetitions, but most of the SEALs were knocking out 20 or more with ease. Sarah had been working on pull-ups for months, knowing they would be crucial, but she had never been particularly gifted at body weight movements that favored taller, longer-limbed athletes. As she approached the bar, Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's attention. This was the moment where her journey would either continue or end in disappointment. She gripped the bar with determination, engaged her lats the way Eduardo had taught her, and began to pull. The first few repetitions felt smooth and controlled. By rep 8, her muscles were beginning to burn, but her mental training kicked in. She thought about all the times she had pushed through discomfort in Eduardo's garage, all the moments when quitting would have been easier than continuing. Rep 12 put her at the minimum standard. Rep 15 moved her into respectable territory. Rep 18 drew murmurs of surprise from the watching SEALs. When she finally dropped from the bar after 22 pull-ups, the silence was broken by slow, respectful applause. Jackson walked over with a new expression on his face, one that mixed surprise with genuine respect. That was impressive, Martinez. Most people your size struggle to get to the minimum. You just posted numbers that would be solid for anyone in this group. The push-up and sit-up assessments went equally well. Sarah's powerlifting background had given her exceptional core strength and muscular endurance. More importantly, her years of competing had taught her how to push through mental barriers when her body wanted to quit. The real surprise came during the timed run. Sarah had never been a natural runner, and her compact build was better suited to explosive movements than sustained cardio. But she had trained specifically for this challenge, adding miles to her weekly routine and focusing on mental strategies for endurance events. As the group set off on the 4-mile course, Sarah settled into a pace that felt sustainable but challenging. The SEALs immediately pulled ahead, their longer strides and superior conditioning evident from the first mile. By the halfway point, Sarah was running alone, no longer able to see the leaders but determined not to let the gap become insurmountable. This was where Eduardo's lessons about mental toughness became crucial. When her legs began to feel heavy and her breathing became labored, Sarah reminded herself that discomfort was temporary but quitting was permanent. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who had first picked up those rusty weights, about the promise she had made to never accept limitations. In the final mile, something remarkable happened. Sarah began to catch up to some of the SEALs who had started too fast and were now paying the price for their early pace. Her methodical approach, the same patient strategy that had served her well in powerlifting, was proving effective in this very different challenge. She crossed the finish line in 6th place out of 12 participants, a result that stunned everyone, including herself. Her time of 28:45 was well within the acceptable range, and better than what some of the larger, more experienced operators had posted. Jackson was the first to congratulate her. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. I judged you based on your appearance rather than your capabilities. That was unprofessional and unfair. You've earned everyone's respect today." But the real test was still to come. Day 2 of the evaluation would focus on the kind of functional strength challenges that separated elite operators from merely excellent athletes. Obstacle courses, heavy carries, and equipment drills that simulated the demands of actual combat operations. The morning briefing laid out the day's challenges. Teams of 3 would rotate through stations designed to test different aspects of operational fitness. Sarah was paired with Jackson and another SEAL, Petty Officer Rodriguez, forming a team that seemed balanced on paper, but was about to be tested under extreme conditions. The first station involved moving a series of heavy objects across varied terrain: ammunition boxes weighing 50 pounds each, water containers at 40 pounds, and equipment cases that ranged from 60 to 80 pounds. The challenge wasn't just about strength. It was about problem-solving under physical stress, working as a team, and maintaining performance when exhaustion began to set in. Sarah approached the challenge with the same analytical mindset she brought to powerlifting. Instead of trying to match her teammates' brute force approach, she focused on technique and efficiency. When they reached the ammunition boxes, she used a farmer's walk grip that allowed her to carry 2 boxes simultaneously while maintaining better posture and balance than the SEALs, who were struggling with single boxes. "How are you making that look so easy?" Rodriguez asked during a brief rest break. "It's all about understanding leverage and load distribution," Sarah replied, unconsciously echoing lessons Eduardo had taught her years earlier. "Powerlifting teaches you how to move weight efficiently. These boxes are heavy, but they're not 400-pound deadlifts." The second station was an obstacle course that had been designed to test agility, upper body strength, and problem-solving under pressure. Rope climbs, wall traverses, and crawling challenges that pushed each participant's physical and mental limits. Here, Sarah's compact build became an advantage rather than a limitation. Her lower center of gravity made her more stable on balance challenges. Her exceptional grip strength, developed through years of deadlifting, allowed her to traverse rope obstacles that challenged even the SEALs. Most importantly, her competitive experience had taught her how to maintain focus and technique when exhaustion threatened to compromise performance. As she completed the final obstacle, a rope climb that left several of her larger teammates struggling, Sarah heard something that took her completely by surprise. The SEALs were cheering for her. Not polite, obligatory applause, but genuine, enthusiastic support from warriors who recognized exceptional performance regardless of the package it came in. The third and final station was the one everyone had been anticipating: the Equipment Deadlift Challenge, a specially designed apparatus that simulated lifting heavy gear in field conditions, with irregular shapes and shifting weight distribution that made the movement significantly more challenging than standard barbell deadlifting. The apparatus was loaded with 405 pounds, distributed across multiple components that required precise coordination and exceptional strength to lift safely. It was the kind of weight that most people, even well-trained athletes, would struggle to handle under ideal conditions. In the field simulation setup, with irregular grips and unstable load distribution, it was a test that had defeated many previous candidates. Sarah approached the apparatus with the same methodical preparation she brought to every max attempt in powerlifting. She analyzed the grip options, tested the weight distribution, and visualized the lifting sequence that would give her the best chance of success. As she positioned herself for the lift, the training area fell silent. This was the moment that would either validate her presence in this elite environment or confirm the doubts that some still harbored about whether someone her size belonged among these warriors. Sarah took a deep breath, engaged her lats, and began to pull. The weight came off the floor smoothly, but the irregular shape and shifting balance made the lift significantly more challenging than anything she had attempted in competition. At her knees, the apparatus began to tilt, threatening to throw off her balance and turn a successful lift into a dangerous failure. This was where years of Eduardo's coaching proved their worth. Instead of panicking or trying to muscle through the instability, Sarah made tiny adjustments to her grip and stance, using technique and body awareness to control the unwieldy load. She thought about the promise she had made to herself all those years ago, about the 8-year-old girl who had refused to accept limitations. With a controlled, powerful movement that showcased years of perfect technique, Sarah locked out the lift. 405 pounds of military equipment rose from the ground to her hips, held steady despite the irregular load distribution, before being lowered under complete control. The silence that followed was broken by Jackson's voice, thick with emotion and respect. "Martinez, in 15 years of military service, I have never seen anything like what you just did. That equipment is designed to challenge our biggest, strongest operators. You didn't just lift it, you made it look routine." As word of Sarah's performance spread through the base, something unexpected began to happen. SEALs from other units started showing up to meet the small-town girl who was rewriting assumptions about strength and capability. Officers who had initially been skeptical were now asking questions about her training methods and mental preparation techniques. Commander Sarah Blake, one of the few female officers at the facility, sought out Sarah for a private conversation. "I want you to know what you've accomplished here goes far beyond just lifting heavy weights," she said. "You've challenged preconceptions that have existed in military culture for decades. Young women considering military careers are going to hear about what you did here, and it's going to change their perception of what's possible." On her final evening at the base, Sarah found herself back at the deadlift apparatus, alone in the training facility. She wasn't planning to lift, she just wanted a moment to process what had happened over the past few days. The transformation in how she was perceived and how she perceived herself had been profound. Jackson found her there, still in his workout gear from the final evaluation session. "Penny for your thoughts, Martinez?" "I keep thinking about my grandfather," Sarah replied. "He taught me that strength isn't about being the biggest or the strongest person in the room. It's about understanding what you're capable of and never accepting artificial limitations." "I think I finally understand what he meant. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. The lessons he taught you have taken you places most people never dream of. What's next for you?" Sarah smiled, thinking about the college scholarship offers that had been arriving weekly, the invitations to train with Olympic teams, and the possibilities that seemed to multiply with each barrier she broke through. "I'm not sure exactly, but I know I want to keep pushing boundaries, keep showing people that excellence comes in all packages, and maybe inspire other young women to discover their own strength." As her plane lifted off from Norfolk the next morning, Sarah pressed her face to the window and watched the base shrink away below her. In her carry-on bag, along with her lucky lifting gloves and Eduardo's photo, she now carried something new. A letter of commendation from the Navy, recognizing her exceptional performance and recommending her for future advanced training opportunities. But more important than any official recognition was the knowledge that she had once again exceeded expectations, proven that determination and proper preparation could overcome any perceived disadvantage. The small-town girl with the big dreams had not only held her own among the military elite, she had redefined what it meant to be strong. The foundation Eduardo had helped her build in that dusty garage in Millbrook, Texas, had proven solid enough to support achievements that neither of them had originally imagined. As Sarah flew home to share her story with the man who had made it all possible, she knew that this was not an ending but another beginning. There were more barriers to break, more assumptions to challenge, and more young women to inspire. The 8-year-old girl who had first wrapped her tiny hands around a rusty barbell had grown into a young woman who understood that the most powerful force in the world isn't measured in pounds or inches, but in the unshakable belief that greatness knows no boundaries. And somewhere below the clouds, in a small Texas town, an elderly man was preparing to welcome home his granddaughter, the one who had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary strength comes wrapped in the most ordinary packages.